Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with another brand new Mattel Jurassic World Survival release. This is the second of the newest Wild Roars. This is the Afrovenator, and this one is pretty cool looking. However, it is very exaggerated. Like, I don't know what's going on with this crest up here. We've got skin hanging from the throat and everything like that. Doesn't really bother me so much, but like, as far as I'm aware, there's no sign of a crest on this species that I've ever heard of. So, you know, I guess they can get away with it in this instance because it is part of the survival line, so technically, like, they're mutated versions of the dinosaurs. But it would have been pretty fun to actually see just a standard version of this before we dove into the mutant versions, so we'd have like a regular, you know, everyday Afrovenator figure from Mattel. But it looks pretty cool. It's got a decent color scheme, not really super impressive. I will say I am impressed with the fine detail looking better in person, because a lot of the images and stuff I had seen of it prior to this kind of made the detail look very muted, but in person it actually is not at all. As far as the packaging goes, it's your standard, as you can see. Again, we've got that nice shot of the Rex up here, of course, Jurassic World Survival, and then when we come here to the back, you can kind of see a sneak peek of the figure, its action feature, the light up attack that it has going on, as well as the other figures that are in this wave. So let's pop this box open and check it out. So here is our Afrovenator, and one thing I can instantly say that I'm not a big fan of is the fact that the tail seems very short on the figure, which isn't the first time we've had that, and obviously it's going to look a little bit shorter than it actually is because of the curve in the tail that it has going on. It's got a really sharp curve, but even still, that tail seems oddly short for the dinosaur. And with Mattel making improvements recently when it comes to like the proportions, you know, especially with like foot size and stuff, it's sad to see that the tail length is still an issue when it comes to Mattel. I feel like, you know, considering they have the tail separate in the packaging, it wouldn't be so much to ask that they just give us a little bit longer tail length for the figures. The figure does still look really cool, and it's a nice species to have in the Mattel line. And one thing that's really cool when we start here in the head sculpt is you can see it actually has lips, which we don't get every day when it comes to Jurassic World dinosaurs. We've got, again, really nice looking skin texture, and as I mentioned earlier, that was one of my biggest concerns coming into this one, but as we can see, the scale detail is actually super impressive. The coloration of the dinosaur almost seems like it has a slight translucency to it, and that obviously is probably because of the light up effect, but because of that I feel like it actually drowns the detail out a little bit, and that's probably why when I was seeing the images that it felt like it didn't have that impressive skin texture, because here in hand it definitely does, it's just harder to see it. We can see the nostrils up here, some decent detail in this random crest that it has going on here at the end of the snout. That does look pretty cool. As far as like its design, it's just not something I've ever heard of on this species. As we move back, we do primarily have a reddish tone for the body color, but there's also some really dark bluish grays that, you know, a spot and pattern here through the face, around the eye area. We have a green eye, and then that same dark tone is what we see for the pupil. The green eye does have a nice gloss coat as well. And we do have a lighter tone here for the lower jaw. You can also see a slightly different shade of the lighter tone here as you move back into the throat, and we have like this weird hanging skin coming down here from the throat, but that lighter tone disappears after that area. We do have really nice, very reptilian style scale detail here in the lower part of the throat, though almost snake-like skin texture right there, with larger and rougher scales as we move a little bit higher into the figure. And it's probably not the case, but it almost looks like we actually have some variation of color, because I can kind of see like reds here and then almost like oranges here. So it almost looks like we do have slightly different shades of color applied to the figure, but if that is the case, it's so subtle it's actually really hard to make out, and I don't know if maybe that's where the lights are inside the figure, so it's kind of making it look like there's different shades of color. I guess we'll have to wait and see when we actually light this one up. But inside the mouth we do, first of all, have a tooth that is really bent right there, but you can see the teeth do have that newer material, which helps to make them look more genuinely sharp, which is definitely a plus. We also have a very nicely textured tongue with a pinkish tone in there and a nice gloss coat. The pinkish tone does run to the upper side of the inside of the mouth, and there's some okay detail up there as well. Same deal for the skin stretching as you open the mouth. The teeth are colored with a light yellowish, like sort of off-white tone. Oddly enough, there's actually a little bit of extra material on that tooth right there. I don't think I've ever seen that from Mattel before. I'll have to try to get that off, but the teeth do look pretty decent overall. As you move back, again, those darker patterns continue to follow along through the course of the figure as you lead down. Once you lead into the body, again, the scales look really quite nice, really vibrant. We have more of those darker tones moving along the back, and there's also a very different style skin texture following along the spinal column. It's, again, kind of hard to make out because of the color of the figure and the almost translucency that it has going on. But it definitely has a bit of a different look to the skin texture up here, like really large scales, almost like scoots running along the top of the dinosaur. As we move down into the arms, we've got some very impressive musculature. You can see the elbow there on the back of the arm. The wrists are placed correctly, which is also nice to see. Some scoots down the fingers, and the claws look pretty good. Fairly sharp looking, unpainted, and they do have a little bit of a gloss coat, but they still look decent for what they are. Articulation-wise, forward and back right there, and also out away from the body. Pretty standard stuff. We have a button here in the midsection, and you can, I would imagine, activate the light up feature and everything with that. We can also see more of that patterning going on. But as you lead out in typical Mattel fashion, it ends as we lead past the hip region. Again, very interesting skin texture. I actually want to get a hold of another one of these and repaint it just to see all of the skin texture, because the colors of this I feel like just really drown out the actual scale detail. Even though it's super crisp, it's harder to take note of more so than many other Mattel figures. But here's a really good area where you can get a good feel for the style of skin texture that I think we see moving along the back, as we have those really weird large scales moving down here through the front of the thigh, and then again finer, more traditional scales moving down along the rest of the leg. We have very nice looking muscle definition as well as you lead down through the thigh into the calf. You've got the kneecap right there, and then as you move into the foot sculpt, again the foot sculpt does look pretty good. It's much smaller than we would have seen a few years ago. We've got some decently sculpted claws with some nice fine detail, and you can see a darker brown that is applied to the feet as you move down. I am noticing, though, we actually don't have the swivel ankle articulation like we usually do, which is kind of strange. But we do have dew claws, and the nails, unfortunately, are unpainted, but we have that darker brown kind of making it almost look like they are, but clearly the dew claw was skipped either way when it comes to that darker tone. As we move out into the tail, you have a few skin wrinkles here in the bottom of the tail. As you move up, again, that kind of larger scaling returns, and then we lead out, and there's also some more hanging skin coming off of the back of the tail here on the bottom as you lead along, and then again we lead out into that really strong curve for the tail out there at the end. There is an area of articulation with a swivel right there, and then when it comes to the leg articulation, forward and back, and they do kind of move out away from the body a little bit, but not a whole lot. So a little limited when it comes to the articulation on this one, as we don't really have like the swivels and the ankles or anything like that. We do have neck articulation as well, which you can see once we push that over. We have a snapping action feature, and that's probably what the button on the side is going to do once we push that. But again, the head sculpt and everything looks pretty nice over here as it did on the first side. As you move back, everything is going to look pretty much the same, except for the fact that we no longer have a button in the stomach on this side, and of course the leg is leading over here as opposed to trailing on the other side. But again, you can really see how nice that skin texture and scale detail is as you move up through the course of the figure. It is so much nicer when it comes to the fine detail than I was expecting compared to what I had seen on the images online. And again, some fairly fine scale detail moving along the underside. And there is the fax app code if you would like to add that one to your collection. So let's go ahead and get a feel for the sounds and action feature. We've got some pretty cool noises, and as you can see, we obviously have a jaw snapping action feature with a little turn in the neck, which looks pretty cool. And of course, the lights look interesting. Not really that great, but I'm intrigued to see it with the lights off, which we will do here in just a moment. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and get a size for a length from the tail to the snout about, I'd say 12 3/4 inches, or around 32.5 centimeters. And then for a height, about 5 1/4 inches, or 13, just a hair over 13 centimeters. For a size comparison, There is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect Day Human Being, next to our very interesting looking Afrovenator, and you can see again, it's pretty much in the standard size range like you usually find from Mattel. And then for another size comparison, and honestly probably the only one we really need, though we will do one or two more, we have the Mattel Wild Roar Utah Raptor, which you can see is roughly in the same similar size range as our Afrovenator. We've also got a comparison with a Mattel Irritator figure, which had come out quite a little while ago. Now, that is one of the smaller Wild Roar figures out there, but honestly, I would say that the Afrovenator might be slightly larger than your standard Wild Roar, but just barely. Then we have a Mattel Baryonyx. This is the recent Sound Surge version that released, and you can see again, pretty similar in size between these two. And then one final comparison with the other Wild Roar in this line that we've reviewed so far, as we have the Pteranodon, also from the Jurassic World Survival line, next to our Afrovenator, just to give you one feel as far as how these two size up next to each other. So let's go ahead and check the light up feature now with the lights off. Okay, it looks super crazy now. We can't see the head or anything here in the darker light, but you can definitely see it looks insane with the lights off. Maybe we should just dim the lights a little more so than actually having them off completely. That one might be a little bit too bright. There, that maybe will be a little better. So there, I think you can get a better look and feel for the lights on this one here. And how interesting it is. Nice green that they've used for it, but again, maybe not the most realistic thing they've done to a Mattel theropod. So this brand new Mattel Jurassic World Survival Wild Roar Afrovenator figure is pretty cool, but it's by no means anywhere close to an accurate version of it. However, it's definitely not meant to be, since this newest line is kind of focusing on almost mutated versions of dinosaurs. It's basically giving them the freedom to create their dinosaurs in any style or any way that they would like, and there's really not much you can say or do about it, because again, if they're mutated, they're not going to look as they should. But again, they did a good job on this one when it comes to the overall design and coming up with something creative. I think, it kind of looks like the dinosaur with a whole lot of different stuff added to it, like weird hanging skin and a crest and stuff. But the fine detail is one of the things that I find most impressive about this one. It also is a bit of a different style of skin texture compared to any Mattel figure I've really seen before. So it's nice to see that Mattel is still, creative when it comes to the texturing of their figures. The scale detail and everything throughout is extremely vibrant and very impressive, which I'm also quite happy about because I was a little worried about that coming into it. The paint apps on the figure are very lackluster. They're really not great at all, and it looks kind of cool because I like the reddish tone with the striping and stuff, kind of almost reminding me of a tiger stripe velociraptor a little bit, and I'm a big fan of that coloration, although obviously the tones are different here. But it still is a little lackluster and doesn't have a whole lot in the way of coloration that makes it all that memorable. Species-wise, though, it is still really cool, and actually I think this might be the first figure that I have of this species now to enter into my collection, which is also kind of cool. But articulation-wise, basically just the standard stuff from Mattel. It does have an action feature, and again, some fairly fun noises. It also has the light up feature, which isn't going to be everybody's favorite thing about this figure, but it is what it is. Some people will definitely enjoy that. So if you are interested, check your local Target, because that seems to be where these are showing up most. Lots of people seem to be finding them at this point, so check your store. Hopefully they have them, if not now, sometime soon. And like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.